It was Las Vegas, September 7th, 1996. The city was buzzing. A Mike Tyson fight was on at the MGM Grand. That kind of night. The air felt thick with money and tension. After Tyson knocked out Bruce Seldon in less than 2 minutes, the crowd spilled out into the casino. Among them was Tupac Shakur. He was at the absolute peak of his fame. He was with Suge Knight, the head of Death Row Records. Suge was a huge, intimidating figure. They were more than just a rapper and a label boss. Their relationship was complicated, a mix of loyalty and fear. Walking through the MGM lobby, someone in Tupac's crew spotted a man. His name was Orlando Anderson. He was a member of the Southside Compton Crips. Just a few weeks earlier, a Death Row medallion had been snatched from one of their guys at a mall, and Anderson was believed to be involved. Words were exchanged, then fists flew. Where Tupac, Suge, and their entire entourage jumped Anderson. It was a brutal, one-sided beatdown, all caught on the casino's security cameras. And they kicked him and stomped him on the ground, then they walked away, leaving him there. They had a party to get to at Suge's Club 662. Tupac and Suge got into Suge's black BMW 750IL. Suge was driving. Tupac was in the passenger seat. They were leading a convoy of cars, all heading to the club. They stopped at a red light on Flamingo Road, right near the Maxim Hotel. It was about 11:15 p.m. A white late model Cadillac pulled up to their right. Someone from inside the Cadillac opened fire. The window of the BMW shattered. Bullets ripped through the car. Tupac was hit 4 times. In the chest, the arm, the thigh. Suge was grazed in the head by a bullet fragment. The Cadillac sped off into the night. Suge, bleeding from his head, made a U-turn and raced down the street. He was pulled over by police not long after. The scene was chaos. Tupac was bleeding heavily trying to get into the back seat. He was pulled from the car and put on a stretcher. He was rushed to the University Medical Center of Southern Nevada. For 6 days, he fought for his life. Doctors performed surgeries, removed a lung. But the damage was too severe. On September 13th, 1996, Tupac Shakur was pronounced dead. He was 25 years old. The question of who killed him started almost immediately, and it has never really stopped. The Las Vegas police investigation was, by most accounts, a mess. Witnesses were hard to find. Those who did see something were too scared to talk. The code of the street is silence. You don't snitch, especially when people like Suge Knight and the Crips are involved. So the case went cold, but the stories never did. They grew and twisted, becoming a part of hip-hop mythology. There are 3 main theories that have dominated the conversation for decades. The first, and most widely accepted theory, centers on that fight in the MGM lobby. It centers on Orlando Anderson. The motive here is simple: retaliation. In the world of street gangs, respect is everything. A public beatdown like the one Orlando Anderson received could not go unanswered. It was a deep humiliation. He was a Crip from Compton. Tupac and Suge were affiliated with the mob Piru Bloods, their sworn enemies. The attack wasn't just personal, it was gang on gang. The theory goes that after Anderson was beaten, he met up with fellow gang members. He was angry, he wanted revenge, and he wanted it that night. His uncle was a man named Duane Keith Davis, better known as Keffe D. He was a significant figure in the Southside Compton Crips. He wasn't just a member, he was a shot caller. He was in Vegas that night too. For years, the story on the street was that Keffe D got a gun, rounded up his nephew and a couple of other guys, and went looking for Tupac. They drove around in a white Cadillac, hunting for Suge's BMW. When they found it at that red light, they took their chance. This wasn't just a rumor. An informant told the Compton Police Department this exact story within days of the shooting. The informant said Orlando Anderson was the one who pulled the trigger, but the Compton Police and the Las Vegas Police didn't seem to coordinate well. Las Vegas detectives did interview Anderson once. He denied everything. Without a cooperating witness or a murder weapon, they had nothing to hold him on. Orlando Anderson was never charged. He was killed 2 years later in 1998 in a completely unrelated gang shootout in Compton. With him died the chance for a direct confession or conviction, but the story didn't die with him. It just went underground, people knew, or they thought they knew. The name Orlando Anderson was always whispered in connection with Tupac's death. But for a long time, that's all it was, whispers. Then, years later, Keffe D started talking. Well, he was diagnosed with cancer. Maybe he felt he had nothing to lose. Maybe he wanted to cash in on his story. In 2011, he spoke to investigators under a proffer agreement. That's a kind of immunity deal. He could tell them what happened without it being used against him in a criminal case. He confessed his role. He said he was in the white Cadillac. He said they were hunting for Tupac as payback for the beating. He said he passed the gun to the back seat, where his nephew Orlando Anderson was sitting. He claimed someone in the back seat fired the shots. He was careful not to say exactly who. Then he got bolder. He appeared in documentaries. He wrote a book called Compton Street Legend. In these public confessions, he laid it all out. He named the 4 people in the car himself: Orlando Anderson, Terrence Bubble Up Brown, and DeAndre Freaky Smith. He said they pulled up alongside Tupac. He said Tupac was trying to get into the back seat. He said the shots came from the back. He was still cagey about who the shooter was, but he heavily implied it was his nephew Orlando. He was telling the world he was an accomplice to one of the most famous murders in history. And he seemed to believe he was untouchable because of that old immunity deal. He was wrong. Law enforcement agencies in Las Vegas, who had been criticized for decades for their failure to solve the case, were listening. His public statements were not covered by his proffer agreement. He was building a case against himself, one interview at a time. In the summer of 2023, the police raided his wife's house in Henderson, Nevada. They were looking for evidence related to Tupac's murder. A few months later, in September 2023, nearly 27 years to the day after the shooting, a grand jury indicted Duane Keffe D. He was arrested and charged with murder with a deadly weapon with a gang enhancement. The prosecution's argument is that he was the shot caller. He was the mastermind of the plot. He got the gun, he got the car, and he led the hunt for Tupac. Under Nevada law, that makes him just as guilty as the person who pulled the trigger. Keffe D is now the only person ever charged in the murder of Tupac Shakur. He is the only living person from that white Cadillac. The other 3 are all dead. His trial is expected to provide the closest thing to an official answer the world has ever had. But for a long time, the Orlando Anderson theory was not the most popular one. For many, the story was bigger than a simple gang beef. It had to be. It was about the war that defined hip-hop in the 90s. It was about East Coast versus West Coast. It was about Bad Boy versus Death Row. It was about Biggie Smalls. The second major theory is that Tupac's murder was ordered by his rivals on the East Coast, specifically Sean Puffy, Combs, and Christopher, the Notorious B.I.G., the Wallace. To understand this, you have to understand the time. The mid-90s were the peak of the coastal feud. It started as a friendly rivalry, but spiraled into something ugly and real. The turning point was 1994. Tupac was shot 5 times and robbed in the lobby of Quad Recording Studios in New York. He was there to record with a rapper he knew. Biggie and Puffy were upstairs in the same building. Tupac survived, but he was convinced they set him up. He believed they knew about the robbery and did nothing to stop it. He became paranoid and bitter. After that, Tupac went to prison on an unrelated sexual assault charge. While inside, he heard Biggie's song, Who Shot Ya? He was certain it was a diss track mocking him. Biggie and his camp denied it, saying the song was recorded months before the Quad shooting. But Tupac didn't believe them. The betrayal he felt consumed him. Suge Knight bailed him out of prison and signed him to Death Row Records. From that moment on, Tupac dedicated himself to destroying Bad Boy Records. He released the song Hit 'Em Up. It is still one of the most vicious diss tracks ever recorded. He directly threatened Biggie and Puffy. He bragged about sleeping with Biggie's wife, Faith Evans. He mocked their friends. It was pure venom. The line had been crossed. The feud was no longer just about music. It was personal. It was dangerous. So when Tupac was killed in Las Vegas, suspicion immediately fell on the Bad Boy camp. The motive was clear: to silence their loudest and most dangerous critic. The theory gained a lot of traction, especially after Biggie Smalls himself was murdered 6 months later in Los Angeles in a drive-by shooting that mirrored Tupac's. It felt like a tit-for-tat execution. The FBI even investigated the possibility that the 2 murders were connected. A key source for this theory was a multi-part investigation by the Los Angeles Times. The articles claimed that Biggie Smalls paid a member of the Crips $1 million to kill Tupac. They alleged that Biggie, who was in Las Vegas the night of the shooting, provided the gun. The story was explosive. It seemed to connect all the dots. It tied the East Coast beef directly to the Crips and Orlando Anderson. It suggested Anderson's crew carried out the hit on behalf of Biggie. The problem is, the evidence for this theory is very thin. It relies heavily on unnamed sources and the word of informants who are not always reliable. Biggie had an alibi for the time of the shooting. His friends and family have always maintained he's innocent. He was reportedly shaken by Tupac's death. The Los Angeles Times later had to retract parts of its story when one of its main sources was discredited. While the East Coast-West Coast beef provided the toxic backdrop for the violence, there has never been any concrete evidence linking Puffy or Biggie directly to the murder plot. It remains a powerful part of the legend, a narrative that seems to fit the epic scale of the tragedy, but it's likely more of a symptom of the conflict than the direct cause of Tupac's death. The real story was probably less about a coastal war and more about a local one that happened to take place in a casino lobby. The third theory is perhaps the darkest. It's the inside job. It's the idea that the man sitting next to Tupac, the man who was supposed to be his protector, was the one who orchestrated his death. This theory says Suge Knight had Tupac killed. At first, this seems impossible. Why would Suge want to kill his biggest star? Tupac was Death Row Records. He was a money-making machine. But the relationship between them was deteriorating. Tupac was talking about leaving Death Row. He wanted to start his own production company, Machiavelli Records. He felt that Suge and Death Row owed him millions of dollars in unpaid royalties. An audit was supposedly underway. Tupac was smart and strong-willed. He was not someone Suge could control forever. And Tupac alive, independent, and angry could be a huge problem for Suge. But Tupac dead? His unreleased recordings would belong to Death Row. He would be a martyr, and his albums would sell forever. He was potentially worth more dead than alive. The evidence for this theory is circumstantial, but it's compelling. Suge was the driver. He was the one who put Tupac in the passenger seat, the most exposed position. Despite the car being riddled with bullets, Suge was only lightly injured. Some find that suspicious. His behavior after the shooting was also strange. He was famously uncooperative with the police. He claimed he didn't see anything, didn't know anything. This could have been due to the street code of not snitching. Or it could have been because he had something to hide. This theory has different variations. One popular version involves Suge's ex-wife, Sharitha, and the former Death Row security chief, Reggie Wright Jr. The idea is that they were plotting to take over Death Row. The plan was to kill Suge and frame it as part of the Coastal feud, but the shots were meant for Suge, not Tupac. The assassins simply hit the wrong man. This explains why Suge was driving and why Tupac was hit so many times, but it doesn't explain why assassins would miss a man of Suge's size and hit the passenger instead. Another, more direct version of the theory is that Suge simply told the Crips where to find him. He knew the Crips were after Tupac, following the MGM fight. He could have used that situation to his advantage. He could have arranged for the retaliation to happen, knowing it would solve his Tupac problem and be blamed on a gang beef. It was the perfect cover. Former lap-dead detective Russell Poole was a major proponent of the Suge Knight theory. He believed that Suge, with the help of corrupt Lapti officers who worked security for Death Row, orchestrated not only Tupac's murder but Biggie's as well. His investigation into Biggie's death led him down a rabbit hole of police corruption and gang connections that all seemed to lead back to Suge Knight. Poole's theories became the basis for the book Labyrinth and several documentaries. He was convinced that the truth was being covered up. For years, Suge Knight has denied any involvement. He has always maintained that he loved Tupac like a brother and would never have hurt him. But his reputation for violence and intimidation has always made him a plausible suspect. He is currently in prison for a separate manslaughter charge. His reign as the king of West Coast rap long over. The theory that he killed his greatest artist remains a chilling possibility, a testament to the brutal business that surrounded the music. So, what went wrong with the official investigation? Why did it take nearly 3 decades to make an arrest? The failure of the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is a huge part of this story. From the very beginning, they seemed out of their depth. They were dealing with a world they didn't understand, a volatile mix of hip-hop celebrity, gang culture, and millions of dollars. One of the biggest criticisms is their failure to act on early leads. They were told about the MGM fight, as they knew about Orlando Anderson, yet they barely pursued that angle. Yaki Gaddafi, a member of Tupac's group The Outlaws, was in the convoy behind the BMW. He told police he saw the shooters. He said he could identify them. But before he could give a formal statement, he was killed back in New Jersey, just 2 months after Tupac died. It was another lead that went cold. The fear surrounding Suge Knight and Death Row was a major obstacle. Nobody wanted to be a witness. Nobody wanted to end up like Gaddafi. People who saw things kept their mouths shut. The LVMPD has been accused of not protecting its witnesses, of not pushing hard enough because they were intimidated themselves, or simply because they didn't care enough about solving the murder of a controversial black rapper. Some investigators who worked the case have defended their actions. They say they were met with a wall of silence. They say the people in Tupac's own entourage, the ones who were supposed to be his friends, refused to cooperate. Suge Knight set the tone and everyone else followed. Without witnesses willing to testify in court, they had no case. But the emergence of Keffe D changed everything. He broke the code of silence. And he did it on television, in a book, on podcasts. He gave the police what they had been missing for 27 years, a direct first-hand account from someone who was there. He laid out the motive, the method, and the participants. He implicated himself as the leader. And in doing so, he may have finally provided the key to closing this case. The arrest of Keffe D in 2023 marks a new chapter. It's a chance for some form of legal justice. but it doesn't answer every question. The alleged shooter, Orlando Anderson, is dead. The other two men in the car are dead. The case against Keffe D will rely heavily on his own words. His defense will likely argue that he was just telling stories, puffing up his own legend for fame and money. They will argue that there is no physical evidence, no gun, nothing to tie him to the crime except for his own bragging. And so, the mystery of who killed Tupac Shakur continues, even with a suspect in custody. The story is so much bigger than just one man. It's about a culture of violence that permeated the music industry. It's about the destructive power of pride and revenge. It's about a justice system that failed a victim, regardless of his fame. Tupac's death was a turning point. It marked the end of an era in hip-hop. The vibrant, creative, and often reckless energy of the 90s died with him and Biggie. The music became more corporate, less dangerous. The beefs became less real. The loss of his voice was immense. He was a complex figure, a poet and a thug, a revolutionary and a gangster. He wrote about love for his mother and about killing his enemies. He captured the contradictions of a generation. That's why people still care. That's why we still ask the question. We now have a legal answer, or at least the beginning of one. The state of Nevada says it was Duane Keffe Davis who orchestrated the murder, carried out by his nephew Orlando Anderson as revenge for a beating in a casino. It's a story that is simple, direct, and rooted in street justice. It's probably the truth. Or, at least, the closest to the truth we will ever get. But the other theories will linger. The ghosts of Biggie Smalls and Suge Knight will always be a part of this story. The conspiracies are too powerful, too woven into the fabric of the legend. They speak to a larger truth about the world Tupac lived in, a world of betrayal and paranoia where it seemed like anyone could have been his killer. The simple answer, that it was a gangbanger looking for revenge, almost feels too small for a figure as large as Tupac. The drive-by shooting on that Las Vegas street was more than a murder. It was a cultural event. It created a void that has never been filled, and it left behind a question that has haunted fans, journalists, and investigators for a generation. Who killed Tupac? We might finally have a name to put in a courtroom. But the story, in all its tragic complexity, will never fully be closed. It will be told and retold, a modern American myth about a king who was shot down in the desert.